Greetings, everyone. Welcome to this particular session. I am very happy to introduce Emi Barresi. She's going to be talking about human-centric agile leadership in the modern era. Um, just as a quick logistic check, please use the chat forum for your questions. We will answer them in the order received. And now to Emi Barresi. She's a global agile leader. She brings an impressive 15 years of experience in technology and organizational transformation. Her track record includes successfully coaching a Fortune 100 organization through a rigorous agile transformation. And having done agile transformation myself, I know what rigorous here truly means to me. In her most recent role, she was in charge of establishing business agility practices at the organizational level for a medical organization. Now that adds even more, regulation on top of it. So definitely we see your role here. Remy holds a master's degree in industrial and organizational psychology and is pursuing a doctorate in strategic leadership at Regent University, set to graduate in May 2025. Congratulations on that. Here, she is developing a leadership model that integrates remote working with technology adoption in a human-centric way. Alongside her academic pursuits, she has garnered various organizational accolades for her outstanding contributions to transformation and change through project management and leadership, further solidifying her standing as an expert in remote work enablement and modern technology integration. Now, Emi, without further ado, the stage is yours. Please proceed with your talk.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for the introduction. I appreciate those who are already here and those who are attending and those interested in this topic. I shared just a little bit before we started recording that this is an area I'm very passionate about. And so hopefully that comes across not only in the content, but also in the interaction with you all. Always happy to take questions at the end as well. And so I'll just go ahead and jump in. The presentation title, as you can see here, is called Human-Centric Agile Leadership, which I will define for remote and what I have termed tech hybrid teams. So I'll go ahead and just move here. We just heard a little bit about me, but I'll go ahead and just run through really quickly. I have developed a leadership model called HEARTH, H-E-A-R-T-H, which is human ethics approach for remote and tech hybrid teams. And just to clarify what that is at the onset here, tech hybrid means you have employed a robotic or AI or some other modern form of technology in a way that used to be performed by a human. So maybe manual processes, or you had somewhere that you have now put in a robot, like at a restaurant, for instance, that delivers drinks or delivers food to your table. So it's not necessarily exclusively remote teams. That is an in-person team, but that's a team that has employed some form of modern technology to serve in what used to be a human capacity. And so that is what tech hybrid is when I talk about it, and I will also highlight that again in the future. I have a master's in industrial and organizational psychology, and I just finished my last course a few weeks ago for my doctorate program at Regent University out of West Virginia, and so very excited to officially call myself a doctoral candidate at this point, working on the dissertation phase. So very excited about that. So I'll run through our agenda for this presentation. I'll discuss the learning objectives, set the stage a little bit, and then we'll get into the meat of the presentation. So one of the things I'll first cover is the principles of human-centric agile leadership. These principles really transcend agile leadership, but it is specifically the area I've worked in for the last 15 years. So I do hold a lot of value to what agility means and does as far as it relates to human-centric leadership. So that's the framing in which we'll discuss today. I'll talk about future readiness and what it really means to be a future ready leader for remote teams more specifically, and those integrating modern technologies. AI is kind of the buzzword and robotics are commonly known, but I'll actually cover a few other use cases in terms of what modern technology might look like for a tech hybrid team and future ready practices for them. I'll talk about integrating AI and robotics in an ethical way and just consider practical applications for these principles. I think one of the things that sometimes is missing when we talk about theoretical frameworks is to then take it to the next step, which is how do I practically apply this? So we'll cover that. And then we'll talk about one of the elements in fostering a culture of innovation and adaptability, which is an element of the Hearth model. And we'll talk about it with a case study. So we'll use that as the framing and the guardrails to discuss that particular element of the model. I won't share the model today, that'll be coming in January, but it is an element for a preview there for you all. So our learning objectives for this discussion, understanding what human-centric ethics are and how they relate to agile leadership. So we'll do a definition around that and we'll look at it specifically in the agile framework, but also I'll kind of touch on leadership in general as it relates to organizations and teams, because I think that's going to be important context for how we discuss this. We'll talk about adapting your agile practices a bit for remote and tech hybrid teams. Tech hybrid I've defined already, but just to remind anyone who may have come in, I did see at least one person come in. Tech hybrid meaning AI and robotics or other modern technologies are in a traditionally human role or a formerly human role on your team, and then fostering a culture of innovation and continuous learning or continuous improvement, whichever framing is more appropriate for you, but really the continuous learning or the learning organization. So those are our objectives. So let's set the stage a bit. I don't have, just a quick sidestep, I don't have a full list of the sources as I have referenced on the bottom, but if anyone's interested in any of the sources, I can certainly provide a full list of all of the content that's going to be discussed here as well. So the modern project environment, I want to talk about three elements there. One of them is technological advancements and global interconnectedness. So we have a rapid pace of technology development occurring in our time right now. When we think about things like cell phones, it took 3 years to adopt cell phones as it took for one product, ChatGPT, to be adopted in 3 months. And so those parallels and understanding the rapid pace of not only development, but also adoption of technologies is really reshaping the work environment and how we think about work and productivity. The other next item here is challenges, right? So challenges and opportunities really that we're having in remote and technology integration in our teams. So things like communication barriers, remote teams may have disparate locations across the globe. And so co-working times is a challenge. Opportunities are present wherever challenges exist. In fact, I believe personally that wherever there's a challenge, a solution has already been created somewhere, and we just have to find it or develop it. And so looking at those sort of challenges and the converse, which are the opportunities, is going to be an important element of our modern project environment. And the need for a new leadership model. So we have a lot of traditional leadership models, whether they are trait-based or development-based. We have a wide breadth of different frameworks and lenses to use. And this modern technology environment where we are having rapid development has really preceded the need for a new model that considers technical literacy and integrating technology in new ways into the way we lead. That is where we stand in terms of our modern project environment. So what are human-centered ethics? Human-centered ethics, as the name implies, places the human at the center of the team, the organization, or the effort and project. But there are some other elements that I want to make sure I highlight before we get into some of the rest of the content here. Inclusivity. So we discussed a little bit here about globalization, but really understanding that we have diverse and diversifying team compositions requires us to prioritize being inclusive in a way that understands others' needs, the human needs, the values that people bring with them, and the experience of individuals. Now, experiences can be cultural experiences, they can be professional experiences, they can be an individual's framing of how they're looking at the world, which can be based on nationality, it can be based on their their upbringing, right? Their families. It really depends on the individual. And so all of those things that we're bringing to the table as an individual are the value points that we have. And being inclusive of varying types of perspectives is very important when we're considering what it means to be human centric. Transparency and explainability. And so what I've really said by that, or what I really mean by that, is the technical literacy is the part of the explainability. How do we explain across the board, across lots of cultures, what it means to have artificial intelligence, artificial general intelligence? What is an LLM? These are common terms that we're hearing. Just as before we had search engines and the word Google, we had to explain these things to people, how they worked. This is a new layer of technology. And being transparent is building trust within your team while we're integrating these sort of technologies. Compassion and empathy really relates to our inclusivity side there, and empathy and compassion are cousins. They're not necessarily exactly the same, but they do have a lot of overlap. And just taking into account the points of view of all of the people that are in the team, the stakeholders, the organizational leaders, having a perspective that respects the humanness of who we are. There's actually a book that I just picked up called The Non-Computable You, and it's really understanding the difference between what we are versus computer functions and operations. And there's some blending of those lines in the modern times. And so making sure that there's distinct understanding of compassion and empathy of the humans and the human that you're bringing to the table or that you're leading. And the last section here is anthropocentrism, which really just is putting our human beings at the center. Typically, this is actually discussed in more of an archaeological standpoint, but this is a term that I have adopted to say we're placing our humans or our people as the central, most important entity of our organization, of our project, and of our team. And I say this completely wholeheartedly. I do recognize that there are people who are tech-centric in the world as well, but my lens and the way that I'm bringing to the table is a human-centric, people-centric, and people are the center. They are the middle of your projects. They're the middle of your team. They are the middle of your organization. And so that is the belief that that is true. So I'm going to move forward from here. And why do humans matter? And I feel like this is a question that anybody could answer in a different way, but we'll answer it in this way, that humans are the juice for your teams and organizations. If you think of your organization and your team as an organism, they are the blood of the organism that is there and operating. And so that is the value of the human that you're bringing to the table. And although we so readily want to adopt amazing things technologically, we must consider the juice of the organization. If we take the blood out, the organism dies. And so we love modern technology. Many people like to adopt the most modern things. About 15 years ago, I first saw someone pay with an option that was electronic outside of a card, and I was amazed by it. So we tend to have this awe and wonder when it comes to adopting new technologies, but understanding the humans behind the operation is really important for teams and organizations. I'm going to just take a quick sidestep to talk about what some of those use cases might be. Now, when we think about adopting modern technologies in a human-centric way, we really want to consider what kind of technologies are out there. So AI is the big word of the day currently, but there are many other use cases for modern technology integration. So things like surgical robotics with precision, right? So a doctor is assisted by surgical robotic during the surgical process. Now, we don't want to remove the doctor from the surgical process, but we do want to enhance the doctor, right, with the surgical robotics. And so that's an example of a human-centric application for the medical field. Another medical field in Dallas, Texas, they're experimenting with hologram doctors. So they have a doctor that you might normally see for your treatment, follow-up visits that take you 2 hours if you live in a more rural area of Texas. That's a long drive for a person, in a human-centric way that considers sustainability. It considers the time of the patient. They might have a local clinic that they can now hologram into to visit with the doctor. So they are experimenting with that in the Dallas area. My son plays sports, and so virtual reality and training for his swing in baseball. You can probably see him behind me here. That is something that they're now implementing there. It's not to say that we are replacing those training coaches and those who are going to be helping him develop as a player, but it is an enhancement to both the coaching staff as well as the players. And he has a wider amount of time that he can be doing some of this development with newer technology in a different way that reads his swing, that reads his pitches, and is able to help them adjust and tweak so he can become a more developed player. The bionic U, I love to explain this one a little bit with the smart contact lenses, although I have read very little exoskeleton or skin. We've heard of Elon Musk's Neuralink, right, and some of the things that they're doing with those implants and chips. How are we doing that in a way that considers our human is really the highlight there, and are we, is the question. Policing is a great use case as well. They have robotic dogs, they have robots that go into parks and kind of police the park. Maybe there's equity building possible in that. If you have a veteran who doesn't have use of their legs, they may be able to sit behind a computer though and be the power behind a robotic, because they have the cognitive awareness and training to be able to interact in certain scenarios. And consumer behavior, these are all things that we've probably already seen. Amazon Whole Foods has a pay by hand function. You can stick your hand on their machine and you can pay at the register with your handprint. I have not tried that one yet. I'm a little skeptical on that one, but I do know it's available. We've also probably seen all the suggested advertising. So what are the things that make implementing these sort of technologies into your teams, organizations, and life human-centric? Three of the areas I'll highlight today are going to be empathy, creativity, and collaboration. So we talked a little bit about empathy and compassion as an element of human centricity. Creativity is a requirement of how we're leading into the future as it relates to change. So I'll highlight that a little bit more in greater depth in a little bit. And then collaboration. So that culture of innovation is what I mentioned earlier, really requires us to think about collaborating, and not only collaborating with humans, but collaborating to create socio-technical teams, right? So we're human and technical teams together. In fact, remote work is technology integration, and I do realize, or I do have that noted somewhere else. So we'll talk on that a little bit in a moment. So understanding personhood in the workplace. This concept to me is probably the meat of why I am very, very passionate about this topic, defining what it means to be a person in a way that is explained universally, because we all do bring different perspectives to a team table. We all, especially if your team is a remote team, you may be, I've had a team where I had a member from Argentina, the Ukraine, India, America, all at the same time in one room, in one meeting, talking about development of a particular software we're building. Those are so dramatically different in terms of what they bring to the table and their experience in life, and how they have all made it to the same table. And so, but there's something, a condition that exists underlying that really links all of us. And so Lemuel Watson put out a text last year called Exploring Personhood in Contemporary Times. And one of the definitions is what I'm going to kind of adopt and talk about this from the lens of, which is a shared inner dimension, that there is an internal linkage that we have as humans, or a shared inner dimension of humanity that really is significant. And it is a collective experience. So he's termed it in there and used the word intersubjectivity in his text to discuss this, and really just meaning that there is something that's happening within every human that is common. It's very difficult sometimes to define that, right? We all have different ideas of what it means to be a human, but at the end of the day, there's something collective in each of us that defines us versus a machine. And artificial general intelligence, which is really that next step beyond just your AI tools, is the requirement that's preceding us needing to explain what the human experience is and define it. And within an organization or in a team, you may be defining the human experience on paper. You may be documenting it. You may be including it in your values, maybe your team agreements, right? You may be using any number of tools to define what it means to you, your team, and your organization. But the key element there is that you define it, that you understand that there is a distinction there. And one of the things that I've seen recently as I've been researching is the service industry as an example. There is fatigue that service workers experience where they really can start to lean on relating more to technology than even their humans. So compassion fatigue occurs, and they have difficulty relating to their human counterparts as much as maybe their telephones or their computers. And so it's very important at this juncture of where we are with technology integration that we are defining this experience, that we are understanding that there is commonality there, and that we are helping people to connect based on this shared interdimension. One of the things that makes technology integration very effective is balancing that tech and humanity. So the belief that humans should be enhanced, not replaced, is not a universal belief, but that certainly is the belief of the model that I've put together, and that is the belief that I will be discussing things from. So if you don't believe that humans should be enhanced and not replaced, and you believe the inverse, then some of this may not be in, or may not agree with. But that is absolutely the lens in which I will be discussing this in this conversation and going forward in my career, that humans should be enhanced by technology. There are a lot of implications for that. Technology adoption should always have a goal or a purpose behind it. We sometimes like the shiny new object syndrome, where the newest technology is something we want to pick up and we don't really know why. We just want to try it or apply it, which is great. Experimentation in agile environments especially is phenomenal. I really enjoy it. But when we think about why we're adopting certain technologies and the purpose behind it, that'll really provide direction for those next steps beyond experimentation into integration. One of the things that is now really important to consider from a leadership perspective is reskilling your workforce or your team. So part of your continuous improvement efforts or part of your continuous learning should consider the reskill options. So an example may look like McDonald's and having a cashier no longer. Do we want to reskill this person now to be a machine technician? They obviously know how to work the machine. Maybe they understand the software behind the background. What are the steps it takes for the organization or the team to reskill the skill set of their team members so that their team members can continue working within their organizational values? I mean, this considers things like keeping your workforce working, right? And that's here some of the practical applications here. I list that as human resources need jobs, right? We have a societal need for people to work. People work to make money. They don't often work to volunteer, even though I love volunteering. It's not my primary job. And I work for money to be able to pay for my family, my home, my other biological needs, right? Shelter and all food and all of that. And so we keep people working for the societal good and the operation of society. So expanding to think about working as part of the system of living and the system of how the world functions and operates. And so that is really a big reason to keep people working, to keep people reskilled, and to consider elevating your humans instead of just elevating your technology. Work-life balance is really important to this generation. Gen Z, especially coming into the workforce, really values working to live, not living to work. And so knowing that that is a value system that this generation is bringing into the workforce, how do we provide that balance? Which, as you saw through the technology use cases, is actually pretty well done with some technologies that we're implementing. But we also expect higher productivity when that kind of thing happens. So improving that productivity here and business outcomes, you can do those in tandem with technology integration, right? So having that purpose that considers improving productivity as well as your business outcomes at the same time in a way that really highlights the human at the center. And the idealist in me wants to say, save the future, right? So we've got plenty of people out there that say AI and robotics will take over. There's people that say they will take over even sooner than we believe that they will take over. And so the idealist in me just wants to throw that out there, save the future. By mastering the tech, we are the creators of it. And as a parent would not allow their children to run the household, we need to not allow our tech children to run the household. We need to maintain that position of control. Building a future-ready agile team. So there's some core elements that I have listed here as far as what some of the components of a future-ready team are. And then I have this listed in a couple of slides, but I'll go ahead and just mention it now. The goal of future readiness is to be future smart. So we want to think beyond our 3-year, 5-year, maybe even 10-year strategies, which are the typical strategies for organizational leaders. And go beyond that. Strategic foresight is a field that really takes us even to like a 2050 sort of time frame. The Department of Defense has a document out there. I believe the document's 120 something pages, and they've taken it out to 2040 that says these are the goals that we have for integrating technology as a nation up to 2040. So we have the tools out there to be able to have foresight, which is that long-term vision, long-term strategy. And we can start yanking some of those insights that even the government is giving us through this document, through other companies that are already looking out that far. Disney has sustainability goals out till 2030, which is actually not that far away, but they've had them out for a few years. 2030 sustainability goals for their parks and their cruise ships. So really, when you start thinking about what does that next step for my team look like, and what we need to expand the way that we're thinking beyond the 5-year, 10-year strategy and look out even further. What that helps us do is prepare. Shifting from responding to change to really being masters of change, right? The only constant in life is change. And being a master of change requires effective planning beyond our traditional planning. Teams that do iterative delivery often talk from a very short timeline. Right now, iterative delivery is my space. We work in 2-week sprints at where I'm at right now, and so that's a short time frame. But often we fail to look beyond that 2 weeks out to do roadmap or strategizing for future years. And so it sometimes makes a disconnect or some dissonance there between how we're developing and the overall goals that we're going to be looking towards later in the organization. Team dynamics are changing, so compositions that consider maybe automation in a way that creates your team to be tech hybrid as a team. Maybe you have a digital assistant that's scheduling meetings for you. Maybe you have an AI tool embedded within your meetings that is taking notes. Maybe that was somebody's job before, right? So these are the changing dynamics of teams that we really need to start using that first word, which is foresight, to start reining in and saying, okay, how is my team going to change, and positioning your team in a way that considers those changing dynamics for the dev team, for the leaders of the team, for your prioritizer, right? How is that changing, and making explicit conversation points about it. Remote readiness. I know that we have a lot of organizations trying to change back to a hybrid model or bring themselves even fully back in the office. There definitely are some real estate implications that have precipitated some of those decisions. There's also some desire for maintaining control in your organization when you haven't figured out how to do that remotely. But The benefits of remote readiness, you're really allowing yourself to have a expanded global talent pool. You're able to expand your diversity of thought, and there are definitely ways you can use technology to hold your teams accountable. And I think that's a really important piece of how we're going to be needing to work, is making sure there's accountability. I think that's difficult for remote teams sometimes to maintain accountability, and so that to me is one of the highlights that I wanted to make sure I called out. Technology enhanced. I mean, if you're not integrating modern technologies, you're left behind a bit. I got to work at Blockbuster back in the days that they were transitioning from VHS to DVD. And in the background was Netflix happening. Now, Netflix actually offered to sell themselves to Blockbuster. I think it was for $50 million at the onset. And when you think about the valuation of Netflix in its current state and time, they probably didn't do themselves any favors by thinking that this disruptor in the industry wasn't going to be a disruptor. Redbox also came around. Now Redbox is kind of dying off a little bit now as well, but that is an example of a disruption in your technology field that people heard was coming, knew was coming, and still didn't respond to appropriately. So I use that as a really dramatic example because there's only one Blockbuster now left in the world, and it's a very nostalgic location. And it's the modern technology integration that they failed to adopt. So it's inevitable for us. It's inevitable for teams and organizations. How do we do it versus do we do it is really the question. And reskilling. So keeping, I put in quotes, workers employed has so many future values, not just for our teams and our organizations, for society, as I mentioned, and it's industry agnostic. So regardless of what type of team, Agile has been applied in so many settings now, right? So we don't only have software development teams, now we have teams in HR doing this. We have Agile people ops happening in the world right now. All of these Agile practices, which just means responsive to change, right? We want to adopt practices that really make us responsive, and re-skilling people is responsive to change in a way that considers your people. I said this a little bit earlier, but I want to make sure I focus on this concept that remote work is technology integration. You cannot have a remote team that operates and functions and holds themselves accountable without either a computer, a telephone, software, collaboration tools, team building tools, right? This is technology integration. And so although we sometimes separate that concept, they are very much intertwined. And so when we think about what makes remote teams effective, it is technology. Agile practices for remote teams. So I'll talk a little bit more about the practical application here. I know those of you who have led Agile teams or led teams in general really need practical conversation instead of only theoretical. So we're going to take it there right now. Tools and technologies that help facilitate remote collaboration. This needs to have a systemic approach. And what I really mean by that is if we're not considering the entire system in which our organization or team is operating, we're not going to always be applying the right tools and technologies for the problems that we have. There are sometimes gotcha surprises or surprises that come along if we're not considering A, B, C, D, E, and F, all of the factors that relate to our teams. And so making sure we have a holistic approach when we're integrating tools and technologies is really important. You might want to consider outside of just your team, maybe your organization, what's available there or what's happening there and where do you integrate there. Maybe you're considering your entire industry depending on where you're working, right? So just having an expanded approach beyond your self-managing team will give you the tools or a lens to start implementing tools in a different way. Trust is the number one critical factor for remote team productivity and cohesion. That means that we need to maintain that focus, right? The cohesion focus, the trust building focus. And so there are a lot of tools and even measures, right? So making sure you measure the implemented strategies. So if you have a team building strategy or a team cohesion strategy or things that you're doing, how do you know where they're working, right? Making sure that we not only intentionally implement these practices, we also need to measure the practices. Kirkpatrick has a model for development and how we measure these different things. And the top layer, or step four, or element four, I forgot how it's named, is really making sure in a long-term capacity. So in 6 months, is this strategy still working? How do we measure the effectiveness of what we're rolling out when it comes to keeping engagement and team cohesion happening? So we sometimes forget the long-term measurement application of that. And then adapting Agile for remote work. So this, as I mentioned, is going to be technology integration. This is going to be what tools are out there. Now, there's plenty of practical things out there. In fact, I've read many articles, even seen books that come out with practical websites, tools, methods of doing this. So I am talking about this more from the 10,000 feet view. When we're talking about responding to shifts and change, we have new technologies, new thoughts, new ideas coming out all the time. So keeping yourself abreast as a leader of the team of what the latest things that are coming out are, that could be as simple as reading your journals or your news articles that are coming out in the different websites that relate to your industry, just keeping yourself abreast to changes in the market because they're happening fast. And there may be a new tool that comes out or a new website that's going to help you with whatever that shift or change is on your team, and keeping yourself adaptive in that environment is really, really helpful. Future smart is the goal. Future smart, as I said, is really just the future readiness, but I want to talk about some factors of what makes you future smart. Understanding the drivers of change. So not only do you really need to know how to change, or what are those drivers or those leverage points within your system that create a big impact of change. Sometimes making a small change in a system makes a gigantic impact, right? And so knowing what those leverage points are, how to adapt them, and how to innovate using those drivers within your system for change and embracing radical change. That is sometimes difficult for people. I'm sure the industrial organizational world loves to talk about how hard it is for people to change, but actually in practical ways, we have the tools we need to make it easier for people, right? So it's only hard when we make it hard because we understand concepts like change champions. We know how to bring people together and get them to team build, right? These tools are out there to help us capitalize on those opportunities. And because we know that the tools are out there, it's really a matter of embracing them and leveraging them to make that change easier for people. I once had a supervisor tell me, he didn't want to change something because the team didn't know how to do the change well. And I said, well, that's the problem. Let's help them change well then first, and then we'll implement the change. And that's the strategy we took. We first helped them learn to be okay with change, and then we rolled the change out for them. Forecasting and backcasting. So backcasting really takes our history and uses it to help us forecast. We talked about foresight as a concept, which takes us beyond 5 and 10 years, using that historical data in a way that helps us build predictive analytics to help us simulate potential things, give us options of A, B, C, up to maybe even Z. Using our data for that is really important. And experimenting and imagining. This is sometimes hard for people to really think about creativity as a business function. And I've just realized that recently. For me, the word creative has always been in my vocabulary, but using that word to help people ideate. I mean, creativity is the part of you that is godlike, right? You can create and imagine anything. And if you can create and imagine anything, then you can bring the right players into the conversation to really help invent that future, or create that future. If you say, this is where we want to be in 2050, then you bring together 20 people that know how to get there. You can really start imagining and creating these innovative and inventive concepts and ideas of how to do things. All right. Ethical consideration. I'm trying to just make sure I keep myself in time check here. Ethical considerations. I'm not going to get into these too deeply, but human first always is going to be really the phrase or the sentence that I'll be talking about from today and forever forward. Human first always, and making sure that technology integration and modern applications of what we're doing keep the human first always. Adapt is really what I've said in terms of an ethical consideration, because it is part of the culture of innovation. Now, a culture of innovation really does require acceptance of change, not only change, like I said, embracing radical change, but that's true agility, right? That is responsiveness to change is true agility. Now, I know we have frameworks, and we even have scrum masters out there for agile teams that are very diehard about their frameworks, and they keep everyone within the guardrails that we've got, which is important. But true agility is the responsiveness or the adaptation that we need. Ethics are central, so making sure that the core part of your values that you're building is going to be in the line of the means are driven by the purpose, which I've listed as anti-Machiavellism. So not the ends justify the means, well, the means are driven by the purpose is really the concept there. And inventing the future. So strategic foresight actually gives us great tools, things like causal loop diagrams, to really help us understand all of the interconnectedness and complexity of systems. Well, once you use those tools and you align that with vision, then you really can start inventing the future in a way that says, okay, my human's at the center, my ethics are at the center, and I know that I have to adapt this. How do I start moving towards that future? All right. Human ethics leadership. I put time for a new model. We're definitely have talked about that already, so I'll move here. And I'm just going to take the last part of my my discussion here to really talk about one use case and one scenario. Now, I have renamed this organization to Tech Innovators Inc. I did not receive permission to use their name, and so I'm going to go ahead and speak about them in a little bit more of an agnostic way, so that I don't give too much information as to who this organization is. But this particular company, we'll talk about them as a case study. So leading in a human-centric remote agile team. So this team was across multiple countries. I think they had 11 different countries represented within their product department, and this specific team probably carried the bulk, maybe even 7 different countries. So every team member on this team almost was from a different country. So they had a lot of difficulties on this team. Let's go ahead and move here. So some of their challenges were keeping creativity going. They had a lot of different disparate personalities, perspectives, countries that they were bringing. So they were across different time frames. 9 a.m., 7 p.m., 11 p.m. was happening at the same time for some of these resources, right? And so how did they maintain creativity and cohesion on the team? That was a really difficult thing for them. Empathy and trust, without having someone to foster that within the team, they really had a difficult time crossing those cultural boundaries and having cultural agility on their own to really build personal connections with people that they didn't know anything about. They were here to develop, right? They were here to create a product. They weren't there to be leaders and to help foster these things. And then collaboration. So as mentioned, different time zones, communication barriers. One of them actually only had internet available during certain hours of their day, and then the internet got cut off by their local community. And so that's something that we don't experience in the States very often, is having cutoff time. Sometimes I think lights during certain events very dramatically might happen, but this was just a way of life for them, that they were used to having restrictions around when they could access the internet. So the approach that they used was what I would consider a human-centric leadership approach. We'll call Sarah the senior scrum master for the team. And the 3 areas we talked about at the beginning, creativity, empathy, and collaboration, are going to be the focus for this case study. So when we think about creativity, some of the things that they implemented practically were virtual brainstorming sessions. So they did use virtual tools. There's all kinds of tools out there. You could use tools like Miro, right? So you have probably been well versed in some of these collaboration tools, but they actually had none of these at the onset. They had nothing other than Slack to use as their primary tool of communication. So they started implementing some different brainstorming sessions. Some of these overlapped. Sometimes they would have, hey, once a month, we're going to all collaborate at a time that we realize is very late for some or very early for others, but it was only once a month and that they did that sort of thing. And then they also encouraged free idea sharing. They had a policy called no idea is a bad idea. And although you may not agree with that, and personally, right, that no idea is a bad idea, just making sure that that's explicitly stated and giving some guardrails around how you contribute to virtual brainstorming was a policy that really helped this team, allowed those who were culturally less apt to bring their voice to the table to do so, and they were continually encouraged to do this. They had monthly innovation days, so they introduced passion projects to the table. This is really where they had projects with a purpose. These aren't just, I'm going to study about the tropical rainforest. These are going to be projects where they talked about things that were purposeful to the organization.
Amy, just wanted to give a quick time check. It's about 15 minutes now.
All right, great, thank you. And then modern technology implementation. So they actually introduced AI on this team very early to offload some of their automatable tasks. So story writing, and what I mean by story writing is really just the creation of it based on a template that they use to get it into their tool to for work management. I don't remember if they used Jira or Azure DevOps on this team, but they were able to create an automated way for them to send these stories off, and that they didn't have to do any copy and paste. They were able to automate that process and freed up development time for them based on the stories that they were writing. The strategy of building empathy and trust. So Slack had this function on there where they automatically paired people to do coffee chats. So on Monday, if you were signed up to get an automated coffee chat, you would receive a new connection within the team or organization to talk to someone in a 30-minute format. They would schedule the meeting for you and say, hey, let's talk about non-work related things and get to know our team members. And so getting to know people in a setting that is just set up for you, automated, and you're participating in it was really helpful for them in building connections. I called these workshops empathy workshops, but really it was training. Essentially, they had a forum in which people could come in, learn about not just active listening, but the concept of compassionate listening and what that means, being able to see the human at the other side of the table and understand the depth that this person was bringing. This happened in a setting of what we'll call a workshop, but really giving those techniques and those tools to people who may never have had those sort of soft skills conversations in their career before, depending on where they're coming from. Regular check-ins was something that the Scrum Master themselves did. So she did one-on-ones with these team members and then provided individualized support based on those concerns that were brought up there. I wrote here full range leadership development, right? So she ensured really that she was looking at the full range or scope of the individual and just using that full range leadership perspective to understand all the components of development, and that being a lifelong or a career-long process for individuals. The fostering collaboration strategy for them, what they did was ensure that they had collaborative tools in place. So one of the things that they had initially at the onset was Slack, but Slack has a lot of functions that you can bring into that. Trello has things now that you can integrate and automate together even with Slack. So they really just took the time, or she took the time and energy to start researching and figuring out what is going to be aligned with our values, our team values, our organizational values, and how we're going to bring people together collaborating with tools across the globe. So time zone considerations is something to consider for that, right? So they did also implement asynchronous communication practices. They knew that 10 a.m. for them was going to be 10 p.m. for some counterparts in the world, and 10 p.m. is a little bit late to be working on movies. I know that, we're working on stories. I think one of my favorite teams ever that I've worked with actually gave me this awesome plaque I have in the background here after I left. I used to work at 11 p.m. for them, and that was 11 p.m. my time, which for them was 9 a.m. their time. And so just making those shifts in the time zones was a consideration that they did here, and then also encouraging areas in which asynchronous communication was appropriate. I know Agile really talks to us about the principle of being in person, right? And it talks to us about meeting, collaborating. And so this is an adaptation that they made for their Agile team that was maybe not a non-traditional Agile principle. And then team building, so they did online games. I actually have learned a lot of and adapted some of their games that they did here, but they provided these spaces to get to know each other. So you can create, getting information from your team members. If they had a superpower, what would it be? And just knowing that you have this bank of data to help people collaborate and creating games and fun environments around them is something that they did, and they organized these regularly. So not everybody attended all the time, but they provided opportunities for those who did want to attend to do things that really allowed them to collaborate as humans instead of only as developers, which you have to be very intentional about in the remote environment. And those team bonds really created a team culture for this team. One of the concepts that or one of the things that they had as an outcome really for that was just clear communication, right? So I'll come from the bottom up here, clear communication, and they really successfully navigated across time zones in a way that I had not seen happen very well in the past before, keeping the people at the center of how they collaborate, improved empathy and trust on the team. So they had actually engagement scores that increased by 400% on this particular team. That is astronomical when you think about engagement. They did start at a place of almost no tools and no technologies and no leader at the helm to help facilitate this process. So it's not surprising in some senses, but also very surprising in others. And they did have enhanced creativity. So the purposeful innovation days and the purposeful passion projects really created some powerful things that they had not originally prioritized out of their backlog of work into the forefront. And they got some really cool things that they ended up being able to use at the organization that they developed from just having people interested and passionate touching these things. So I really talked about already the conclusion, so I'll kind of move forward in this. These are really the outcomes there. And we'll just do a quick debrief. So human ethics approach. So in practice, the what of this is person centricity, right? It's human first always, people centric, ethics at the core. Why? Here are some of the practical things, increased engagement from your resources, reduced turnover, which results in reduced costs, right? And higher adoption of your technology, which is a greater cost for some organizations. Software implementation, hardware implementation is a pretty high cost line item in your budgets. And so making sure that there is a great adoption of that is also a why for that. And how really taking that practical application of the theoretical construct and just making sure that's the reason and the framework in which you're looking at theory. Theory is wonderful to create. Theory is wonderful to talk about, but taking it to that next step, making sure we have practical strategies that really meet us where the theory starts. And our key takeaways. So this is my last slide, and then I'll get into any questions that we may have here. So key takeaways for today in terms of the learning that I hope you were able to take away: that human-centric ethics placed people at the front, human first always, that technology integration is important, but we need to be enhanced by it. The approach for this really helps us with, practically speaking, engagement, retention, experience, and adoption of technologies in a way that elevates the humans. So both the humans that are operating, developing, creating the work, but also those that were the users of our technology or of our work that we're creating. We must define personhood. And so I've defined it as a shared inner dimension, a shared inner experience, making sure that there's an explicit definition of what personhood is on your team or in your organization as a leader. Effective integration that balances our tech and our humanity. So making sure that we're not ignoring the technology like Blockbuster did, but ensuring that as we're adopting that technology, we're considering the human elements. Future readiness. So what that just means, future smart, right? We want to be future ready. We want to be future smart. And then marrying our theoretical constructs with a practical application for them, and ensuring that there is the next step for our theory, not just that we create theory, but we know how to apply it in your teams. So that is my presentation. My leadership model is launching in 2025 January, so that's why I didn't share it yet. I just want to make sure I say that these are some elements of the model that will be released in January, but it has not been released yet, so I want to make sure I state that as well. So thank you so much for letting me present here today. Like I said, very passionate about the human experience, about the human element, about how we're bringing this technology to fruition in our communities and in our world in a way that elevates us, the masters of the tech, versus the other way around. So thank you.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful, Emi. It was really an awesome presentation, trying to bring the human component, in the world of AI, people talk about responsible AI and, bringing the human part of it into the equation as well. So it was very nicely done. And I'm really looking forward to, what the model is going to be that you are going to be publishing. So thank you very much for your wonderful presentation here. I'm seeing a lot of amazing notes in the chat as well here, so that's wonderful. But there is one question from John, and that question is this, and I didn't want to give any of my thoughts, wanted to make sure that you are able to provide your thoughts as a speaker. So the question goes this way: do you feel that the younger generation may lack this ability to find humanity, compassion, and empathy required in a workforce? I think this was very early on when you were talking about those three elements.
Yes.
So wanted to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you for the question, Don. I think as far as what the research is showing that I'm seeing, right, these are teachable things. So I think naturally what we're seeing is that there is a disconnect with the more we connect to this, the phone, right, there is less of a connection to humans. And I think that's where we're seeing the decrease in compassion and empathy from people. But it is teachable, it is developable. We can develop these skills in people, right? So although they may be bringing that into the workforce based on the fact that they've never been disconnected from a cell phone, the fact that they've always had the internet or a computer, that is creating even shorter attention spans, all kinds of things that psychology research is showing us. But what we can do is teach it, right? And I think that's going to be the important factor there, is having leaders, especially those from the older generations, be the bridge with the younger generation. And we can learn a lot from the younger generation, and the younger generation can learn a lot from our wisdom of the older generations. So I think as far as what we really can do there to help bridge that gap is combine, or you really bridge those two generations, leaving workforce. Effective succession planning is kind of one of those practical strategies, right? Where we think about, okay, this workforce was more people focused, this workforce is more tech focused. Where's the gap, and how do we start developing these skills in our incoming generation?
Right. I think
this is truly powerful, and people first, person centricity are so powerful, and I was listening to your presentation and shaking my head here. The problem, I guess, when we talk about leadership, specifically in organizations, and what we're teaching students, future leaders, in our business schools, or practically all business schools, we teach profit first, and our entire system, the economic system, the market is based on the value of a firm is based on the next quarter profit, right? And I wonder how we're going to get there to the point where even a company, especially non-profit organizations like OpenAI, to embrace this idea, person centricity, people first. What do you think?
So I think it's going to have to be the framework of understanding it from a societal lens. I think we've used the word things like sustainability, right, to understand environmental impact. But we need to really expand that and think about it from a social change perspective and a societal impact. I mean, we have historical industrial revolutions that teach us from what's happened in the past. I think something like 30% of prior to the steel age jobs that we have today, it's only 30% are the same kinds of jobs or roles that we had, right? So we have all this historical data. I think being explicit and being loud about it. I'm a bell ringer. I love to ring the bell when I see something on the horizon. We see the movie Titanic, right? We're like, hey, iceberg right ahead, right? There's an iceberg sometimes in the society that we need to acknowledge, ring the bell, and be a little bit louder about. And I think understanding the social impact of this is going to be part of the conversation that needs to be continually present.
In one of the conferences that I attended on HIMSS, it is Health Information Society conference, the person was basically saying, like, leadership first, technology next. That really brings some of the things that we also talk about in the leadership, which is the triple bottom line. Like, it's not just the profit, it's the one P is for the profit, the other P is for the people, the third P is for the planet. And somehow, we need to bring that ethics into the equation, the right people in the right seat, in the right bus, and, that kind of thought process, and bring also ethics into the equation to be able to solve this thought process. I think, I know you touched on the ethics as well over here. So
Yes.
there's a lot to, digest and take it forward.
Yes.
Emi, again, I don't think there are any other questions, like most, acknowledgement and agreements and stuff like that. Thank you very much for your time today. In the interest of time, I would like to, mention that we are going to go for a break for about half hour at this point, and we will be resuming at 1 o'clock. So please be ready